marriage is not about the wedding. It's not about this fancy ring. It's not about a fancy house. It's about building a life together. It's about the vows that you make to your spouse, and the vows that you make to God. And those are important.
Hey everyone, this is Yvette Hampton. Welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. I am back with my friend Misty Bailey, and we're talking about marriage from a homeschool mom's perspective. And this is something that most of us who are listening to this deal with, because most of us are married. And if you're not, these truths are important as well, because maybe you'll be in a future relationship or you have people around you who are married and you can help encourage them as well. And so I am glad to have Misty back with me this week. Before we get back into our conversation, I want to say thank you to our sponsor, BJU Press Homeschool. Do you want help managing your homeschool day on a day-to-day basis? BJU Press has a new homeschool hub that can dramatically simplify things for you. You'll be able to see your child's workload, document grades, modify schedules, and more. The BJU Press Homeschool Hub is the resource you need for painless planning and happy homeschooling. Visit bjupresshomeschool.com to see how the hub can change your homeschooling. Misty, I'm so glad to have you back today. This is fun. I love talking about marriage. And, I think it's so important. And you kind of touched a little bit on this about just modeling this to our kids as our kids are growing up and they're seeing our marriages displayed in front of them. And I think they are very in tune to us. I think kids observe more than we often think they observe. And that can be a really good thing, but it can also be a really scary thing if, we're having struggles, whether in our marriage or our parenting or just, with a job or life or whatever it is. But kids are not dumb. They know when there's struggles and they know when things are going really well. And so I think on both ends, it's important for us to set this example for our kids and to model for our kids what a good, healthy marriage looks like, because part of homeschooling is to prepare them for life. It's not just the academics. It's not the math. It's not the history and the reading and the science. That's part of it. But another huge part of homeschooling is preparing our kids for life and therefore preparing them for marriage and parenthood themselves. And I was thinking about years ago, before Brooklyn was born, Garrett and I used to own a stationery store. And so we sold wedding invitations and birth announcements and things like that. And it was always so funny to me because people would come in and they would spend a ton of money on wedding invitations, hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And I was like, it's just paper, right? But they would be these beautiful, elaborate invitations. And it was great for us because that was our business. But I remember thinking, I hope that these people care as much about their marriage as they do about their wedding. And it something that we are really trying to instill in our girls, of course, just the sanctity of marriage, the importance of marriage and that unity, because it really is a display of Christ and his bride, the church. So talk to me about how you work with your husband to display a good, healthy marriage for your kids as they're getting older. Now you've got your oldest ready to graduate and launch into her world of adulthood. How have you prepared her for that?
Yeah, well, I think for me personally, my parents were divorced when I was 11. And so I was a church bus kid. My parents were never in church. And so I didn't really have that model of what a Christian marriage is supposed to look like. So, or what it should look like. There were people within our church, of course, my church that was married. And, I had an aunt that took me to church, but overall, I didn't have that model. And so when my husband and I got married, my parents couldn't even agree on my wedding, period. So we eloped and went to Tennessee and got married. And I had always dreamed of this big, fancy wedding in a church. And I had all of these expectations of what I wanted my wedding to look like. And so starting right off, my marriage did not necessarily meet my expectations or what I thought marriage should look like. And we've openly talked to our kids about this. We actually took them back to where we got married. And, I have tried to instill in them that, we might not have had what, it would make the cover of a wedding magazine, but at the end of the day, your marriage is not about the wedding. It's about the marriage. It's about the relationship. It's about building this life together. And I think that our society and our culture puts all of this pressure on young couples coming in about, what marriage is supposed to look like. And, starting with the wedding. So, that's something that we've definitely tried to train our kids, or, model to our kids, is that, marriage is not about the wedding. It's not about this fancy ring. It's not about a fancy house. It's about building a life together. It's about the vows that you make to your spouse, and the vows that you make to God. And those are important. So that's one thing that, we have really tried to instill in our girls. We do not allow, casual dating. That might be one of those touchy subjects. I don't know if you want to elaborate into that. But, we believe that,
Sure.
Dating in general is a model of marriage.
Yeah.
Whenever you start dating, you want to make sure that the person that you're dating is somebody whose values line up with yours, and who you could, see marrying someday. There might be a getting to know each other period, but at the end, even dating should be with the mindset of marriage. It's important for that. I believe that's what God, wants us to do, is to not, date around or whatever, but to just build a life of value, with somebody. So I don't know if you want to elaborate any more on that, or if we want to keep moving forward.
Go ahead. We actually were in the same boat with you, and we've got a 17-year-old,
Hmm.
and it's so interesting because she's had some young men in her life who she's
Hmm.
talked with,
Yep.
but not been in a serious relationship.
Hmm.
And it's so interesting because she's the one who will say, and it's, I think because we've talked about this for her whole life, she's like, I could never see myself marrying
Hmm.
him. And so, she'll just kind of ease her way out of that. They can be friends, but, she's like, it's nothing more than that, because he's not someone I would ever marry. And she doesn't want to date just for fun. We've talked a lot about heartbreak. Garrett and I
Hmm.
went through our high school heartbreaks. I mean, from middle school all the way through high school. And I mean, that's a huge regret
Hmm.
that I have. And I wish that I had not gone through that. And I don't want my girls to go through that either. And one of the things that I've told my girls is, when it comes to dating, I've given them the analogy of a heart.
Hmm.
And every time you get into a relationship with a young man, you give him a little piece of your heart. And on your wedding day, you want to be able to give your husband your entire heart,
Hmm.
not just a heart that has a bunch of pieces ripped out of it that you've given to someone else. And so yeah, I mean, though it's so funny. Brooklyn, my oldest, she refuses to call it courting. She's like, don't
Yes.
ever call it courting. I'm like, you can call it
Same.
whatever you want. But she will not allow us to call it courting. She thinks that's what would she say? Cringy.
Yeah. And I think that having like-minded people around you too, as you
Yeah.
are, encouraging your children to date that way, to date with the idea towards marriage, I think
Hmm.
is important, because, we switched churches in the midst of, because there were a lot of changes for us in 2020. We
Right.
switched churches in the midst of all of that too. And at our old church, there were no other families that really had those same values in regards to dating as us. And at our new
Hmm.
church, there's a lot more homeschool families. Not that homeschool families are the only ones that have those values,
Sure.
but I have found that, there are many more that have those same values and those same ideas towards dating and towards marriage as us. And I think that has been really, really important for my girls to see that. And my son, he's young. My girls have had, same thing. They've had some, interest. My daughter is actually in a relationship, and it's been fun building relationships with the other family, and then
Hmm.
also just seeing them respect each other and respect um their godly values and their parents, and seeing that same model that we're trying to live up with our kids, seeing that also being lived out in her boyfriend's family as well. And
Yeah.
it's wonderful, and it's exciting for me having teenagers, and seeing these things take shape, and knowing that someday I'm going to get to watch that with my kids. So, but we can move on from that. I don't know
Yeah.
how much more you want to get into with that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah. No,
yeah.
but it's important because it really
Hmm.
that is part of homeschooling,
Yeah.
like I said, is training them and
Hmm.
raising them up so that they will have successful
Hmm.
marriages.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I
And they
mean,
see traits and,
you
and,
want
and,
that.
and yeah. And they see traits in their dad that they want one day in a husband. And, they
Yeah.
might see traits, in their dad that they might not want one day in a husband.
Sure.
And it's the same with the other way too. I know that their boys might, see traits in me that they're like, I don't necessarily know that I want you to one day grow up to be your mother in some ways. But there's also, traits that I hope that they see too, and it's been fun. It's been a fun part of life. And it's a season that I always dreaded, but now I'm loving it. There's parts I don't like too, but it's been really fun. And I know another thing, with having teenagers and having them reach those marriage years. And one thing that whenever we first got married, that was really kind of frowned upon was having kids, right after you got married, and the joys of children. And I think that is something else that in today's society, children aren't necessarily, I don't feel like, always seen as the gifts that they are. And we are very much a self-focused culture, I feel like, and that's something that wasn't modeled to me that I'm hoping will someday be modeled, that my kids will one day take a different, outlook of, and that is, not waiting until the perfect time to start a family. And that's something that even, the girls have also talked about, with possible future mates. What do you see your life like? Do you see yourself having children? When do you see yourself having children? What do you, want me to do as a wife whenever, we do have kids? What do you see our lives being lived out as? Do you see yourself homeschooling? Do you see yourself doing, going to public school? And I think that is something too that, we really need to talk to our kids about. And those are important topics that I don't think are always addressed when people get married. And it's something that I wish I would have maybe thought more of, when I was dating, that I didn't really fully take into account.
Yep. Good stuff. Let's take a break. We'll be right back. We want to thank all of our sponsors for making this show possible: BJU Press Homeschool, CTC Math, Apologia, and IEW. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do this. Visit the show notes for links to these great companies and thank them for supporting the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. We are back with Misty. Let's talk about dependency on our husbands, if that makes sense, because I think oftentimes as wives, we go into marriage sometimes, especially if we have gone through college and, we have these ideas of having a career, and now all of a sudden we've got kids. And now on top of that, we're going to homeschool them. What? We're going to stay home and we're going to teach our kids. And that is just an idea that for so many moms, I know just the idea of staying home alone, the idea alone of staying home is how I want to say that, is a really big shift in thinking, but then piling homeschooling on top of that is a really, really big shift. And I think a lot of times that those moms feel like, oh, I don't want to be completely dependent on my husband. And that somehow is going to make me weak as a woman or as a wife, or, let's talk about that for a minute. Have you seen that to be the case, with yourself or with others that you've encountered where, women just feel maybe less than because they're not the ones who are out working?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, when my husband and I got married, I had full intentions on being a public school teacher. I had no intentions whatsoever of homeschooling. And then God called me home. I was pregnant with my second, and daycare was just more expensive than what I felt like I was bringing in. And I just felt God saying, stay home with your kids for a little while, stay home with your kids for a little while. And again, being the child of a divorced parent, my mom taught me very much so to never be dependent on a man. If anything, when we first got married, she was like, well, make sure you put this money back in case, things don't work out. And she did. And I understand why she did based on her experience, but that's not how I wanted to come into my marriage. That being said, I came into it kicking and screaming with the dependency. I struggled for a long time, and I feel like God really broke me of that. And that's one reason why he led me to stay home in the beginning, and then why I ended up, how I ended up getting to homeschool, because I don't think I would have as easily quit my job just to homeschool my kids. Whereas, they were really young, they were babies when I quit. And I think that, in today's culture, again, it is looked down upon to be dependent on anybody, whether it be, your husband or just, I think society wants us to be these independent women. And that's what our kids are being bombarded with every
Yeah.
single day in the media. And homeschooling looks different. You're more dependent on your spouse, and it's not a bad thing. It does not make you weak. I rely on my husband. I rely on him every single day. He is important to me, and we rely on each other in different areas of our lives.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to get over that mindset of dependency making us weak and not wanting to be dependent on a man. And I think homeschooling is a great way to do that, because
Yeah.
we are so dependent, on our husbands. Yes, I work, you work. There are many homeschool moms that, work and homeschool. But overall, in most households, it is the man bringing in the majority of the income, and we are dependent on
Right.
him for that. So, yeah, it was a hard
Yeah.
transition for me. I don't know how it was for you, but it was a hard transition for me. But I'm so thankful that I did, and I think that it's made our marriage stronger to be
Yeah.
dependent on him. And I'm very thankful that I broke that mold.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, really, it all just comes down to a paycheck
Mm-hmm.
because it's not one works harder than the other.
Exactly.
It's just one is bringing home the paycheck and the other is at home taking
Mm-hmm.
care of the home so
Mm-hmm.
that he can go out and make the paycheck. But, mom's job is just as important
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
as dad's job.
Mm-hmm.
She's the one caring for the home. And I think as moms, I know for myself at least, that oftentimes I even in that regard, I feel inadequate because I feel like,
Mm-hmm.
my house, I'm home. So I
Mm-hmm.
should have a clean house all the time. I should have my laundry done all the time. The dishes should be done. There should be groceries in the refrigerator. The kids should be getting homeschooled perfectly because I'm home. That's my job.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so when all of that doesn't get done, which is impossible to have it
Mm-hmm.
all done perfectly all the time, it just doesn't happen. I feel inadequate and I feel like I'm just not doing this right. And I'm not living up to my part of the deal. You work and I am home to take care of the family, but maybe I'm not doing it great. And I think that is just a lie from the enemy who's telling us, you're not
Yeah.
enough. You're not enough homeschool mom. You're not enough homeschool wife
Mm-hmm.
to be
Yeah.
doing this. And so it would be better if you would just go put your kids in school and you could
Mm-hmm.
get all of these things done and have the laundry done and have a clean house and have dinner made every night. And yet, we have to fight that lie and just say, no, you know what? My family comes first, even with a messy house and 10 loads
Yeah.
of laundry.
And I'd love to come back to the inadequacies, absolutely, because I think that's something as homeschool moms we all face when it comes to marriage and
Yeah.
homeschooling our kids. But I want to add in the dependency part that, my husband has told me many times that he was always thankful that he did not have to worry about who was taking care of his kids,
Yeah.
our kids, where they were at, what they were doing, because I was at home with our kids each and every day. And he's like, I would hear some of the other guys he worked with, he would say that, they had this babysitter cancel, or so-and-so had to watch the kids, or they had to call off work because somebody was sick and, the wife didn't have any more sick days. And he's like, I never had to worry about that.
Yeah.
The kids would get sick. I was with them. And that is a peace of mind that we're able to give our husbands,
Yeah.
by doing that. And I think we underestimate the value of that to our spouses. And my husband has said many times he's been very, very thankful for that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. We are out of time, but we're going to come back tomorrow. We're going to talk more about this because we have more marriage encouragement to talk about. Misty, thank you for being with us again today. And thank you guys for listening. It is always so fun to know that you're on the other side of this microphone and camera. We love being able to encourage you. And if this ministry, the Schoolhouse Rocked ministry, is a blessing to you, would you consider a donation? Go to schoolhouserocked.com. You can make a donation of any amount. It could be a one-time donation, a monthly donation, and help support this ministry. We love doing what we do. And, we're talking about work, Misty, you and I, and this is my work.
Mm-hmm.
And, I get to do this for a couple of hours a week and that's it. And my husband does all of the heavy lifting and I get to spend my time being a wife and a mom. But I love being able to encourage and bless you guys because my guests like Misty are an encouragement and a blessing to me. And so thank you guys for being with us. You can learn all things Schoolhouse Rocked by going to our website, schoolhouserocked.com. Have a great rest of your day and we'll see you back here tomorrow. Bye. The Homegrown Generation Family Expo is back. The Homegrown Generation Family Expo is a live and fully interactive online conference coming March 6th through 9th. Registration is now open at homegrowngeneration.com. It'll be 4 days of nonstop encouragement and fun that you can enjoy from the comfort of your home. Registration includes lifetime access to every session. Mark your calendars for March 6th through 9th and visit homegrowngeneration.com to register today.